Hi and welcome back to Mysteries Channel. Thank you for clicking on my channel. And yeah, I wanted to do a totally different video today. I wanted to do a viewer suggestion of the 5 white eagles of Merida. And it was super hard. It was hard because there aren't very many English translations. In fact, I only found 2 and both of them differ significantly. So I felt like I should just study up on it more. But it ties so nicely into the idea that the myths of old are telling us a story while recording a historical fact and teaching us a lesson. It's a beautiful story. So if you're into that kind of stuff, don't forget to click on that video. Today's video is a little bit different. It's going over a subject that I've talked about before. And the last time I did this subject was giants, and it was in North America. And it was specifically North America, but mostly around Nevada, the Lovelock area. The reason why I bring this one up today, I wasn't planning on it, but it just seems interesting that I keep coming across this. For this video, what I was really trying to do was I was trying to find an ancient Sicilian myth that may be tied into the Pantelleria Vecchia bank monolith, hoping that there was a story out there that had been passed down that specifically talks about a monolith at the southern end of the island, hoping that I could be like, look, there it is. The story was already telling us. We just now found it. We didn't know. Didn't happen. Of course not, because I wanted it to. No, instead what I found was an amazing history that centers around this island. And so today is really going to be a 2-part video. Part of it is going to be the giants of Sicily, and the second part is going to be a historical record of the very first conquistadors putting down in writing what the inhabitants of of Mesoamerica told them about their giants, Quetzalcoatl. So that being said, let's just get right into it. Sicily is actually known as the land of giants, and I think that is interesting because I just had no idea. Truth be told, I really wasn't into any of this stuff before. I just thought it was all a bunch of bullshit. But the more I looked into the older writings from different parts of the world, the more I realized there are certain things that show up every damn time. And 2 things that seem to show up no matter where you look, as long as you're looking very far back, you're going to find giants and you're going to find a flood. Interesting. Anyway, so I start reading up on Sicilian myths, and I'll tell you what, I'm amazed at the amount of myth, legend, and culture that comes out of this tiny little island. It's a place of unending history, some of which we're just now figuring out with this monolith that they found in the water. And it's varied. Because so many civilizations have centered on this island, it's hard to keep track of what is what, because the legends over time stay similarly the same, but names are changed. And so it's almost like you don't know if you're coming across another legend or if it's just a change of names for another civilization. I am leaning towards that. I'm leaning towards it's a myth that changed over time, where the name changed, but it's the same myth just being retold and retold and retold. The island itself is a triangle. It is the largest island in the Mediterranean, and it's the largest region of the modern state of Italy. The most ancient indigenous people of Sicily are called the Sicani, and in ancient times, the island was actually called Sicania, not Sicily. Researchers are torn on whether the Sicani came to the islands from what is now Spain, or if they were just always there. The first historical mention of the island and its inhabitants are in the Phoenician record in the 11th century BC, and that is when they begin to settle there. However, the island has already been inhabited and there is already a history there. We don't know if there are the original inhabitants or if the original inhabitants were pushed off the island or killed off, or if they were Spaniards coming down and, settling anew. And if we go back to the very absolute beginning of what we can actually find, it is that basically Sicily is a continuing clash of people, cultures, civilizations. It's an island of myth and legends, of violent landscape and sweet temptations. Many people have defined Sicily as the land of giants, and it goes all the way back into the 8th century BC with Homer's Odyssey. Cyclops is a giant who dies in Sicily. Other mentions that are brought to us are from Giovanni Boccaccio. He is an Italian writer and poet and a Renaissance humanist, and he tells, now hold on to your socks for this one, he tells us of a 100-meter high skeleton found in Sicily in 1731. 100 meters would roughly be about 328 feet. So that is one hell of a skeleton. Sorry, I looked into this a second more after I recorded my video, so I'm just going to put it in here. This is a relative size of Boccaccio's giant as given in where he writes the account. The account written, I had the date wrong. The discovery of the fossil was not in 1371. The discovery of the giant fossil was in 1342. He writes about it later, possibly in 1371, but in his writing of it, he gives this account of what giants look like towards regular people. Please remember this for later on when I go over the next story from the New World, because man, the sizing holds true on both sides. Okay, that's it. The giants have had several different names over the course of history, like I was telling you, from Cyclops to Tifio to Enceladus, and there are more and more even than that. Legend among Sicilians to this day is that the island itself is formed with a body of a giant, and that there are many ancient myths, giant myths associated with this island. It's hard to say, but many might just be the retelling of the most ancient of the myths. So let me just tell you how far back it goes and what it is. Typhon attempted to overthrow Zeus for the supremacy of the cosmos. The two fought a cataclysmic battle, which Zeus finally won with the aid of his thunderbolts. Defeated, Typhon was cast into Tartarus, or buried underneath Etna on Sicily. So that is one legend. Here is another. One of the most important battles in Greek mythology was a fight between the giants and the sons of Greece and Uranus. The Olympian gods were trying to overthrow the old religion and establish themselves as the new rulers of the cosmos. According to the most detailed source for this battle, what started the war was the giant Alcinoüs stealing the cattle of god Helios. A prophecy had it that the giants would only be defeated if a mortal was to help the gods. To protect her children, Gaia tried to find a plant that would shield the giants from any harm. However, Zeus stopped Eos, dawn, Selene, the moon, and Helios, the sun, from shining, and took every single plant for himself. When the battle began, Heracles fought Alcinoüs. I know I'm slaughtering every damn name, and I'm sorry. However, the giant would not die as long as he stepped on the soils of his homeland. With Athena's advice, Heracles dragged Alcinoüs away from his homeland and killed him. The other giants had similar fates. Dionysus killed Eurytus. Athena buried a giant under Sicily as well, and that giant's name was Enceladus. In fact, if you go further into that story, many islands are actually the bodies of giants and or were buried underneath of islands, like chunks of land were put as burial mounds on top of the giants. And this one is a different version of the story. And yet still others say that Encletus, son of Tartarus and Ge, was one of the 100 armed giants who made war upon the gods. He was killed, according to some, by Zeus, by a flash of lightning, and buried under Mount Etna. Still others say in this very same telling of this legend that it was actually not Zeus but Athena's chariot that killed this giant, and as soon as he died, she took a chunk of land and threw it upon him, creating Sicily. And what else have I found about this area? A great number of mythological characters visited or lived in Sicily. Persephone was abducted by Hades near Enna in the Sicilian hinterland. Erithus, originally an Arcadian nymph, fled the enamorous advances of river god Alpheus and ended up in a spring in Syracusa. Charybdis, the water-sucking daughter of Poseidon, created the dangerous whirlpools that almost sank the Odysseus while passing through the Straits of Messina. And meanwhile, Dionysus, also known as Bacchus, so the story goes, came across a strange unknown plant during his voyage to Sicily. Curious, he took a sample of it for him, and to this day we all enjoy the vine. You know what vine I'm talking about. That's right, wine vine. Some other interesting things to note are that other ancient things are being found there. Not only is there the monolith on the southern part of the island or under, in the southern coastline of the island, but also there are dolmens that are being found that even with their more acceptable timeline, they're still pushing back the history of Sicily pretty damn far back. On top of that, there are also stone circles that are found along the French coast and in the Sicilian hinterlands that push the dates back further and further back. So, although I did not find what I was looking for, I found the giant myths interesting because, well, they seem to be connected to any place that is old enough to have its own mystery. No matter where that you are in the world, there is going to be a story of giants with the formation of a land. I'm telling you, it's just weird. So this next one I'm going to go over flips over to the New World. And I found this one interesting because it's a little bit different than what we're typically taught about Quetzalcoatl. And it's one of the oldest ones written down. Came out of the book that I was reading before. This is the Mythology of All Races, the Latin American Mythology, Volume 11. This is one of the earliest accounts taken from conquistadors and their interpreters while they were there. Preface before I go over it, actually, I'm going to say this one thing. The writer in this book makes a good point. He talks about the calendar that is used there and how everything that we associate with a calendar, we kind of associate with mythology. However, when the earliest of Spaniards question the Mayans and the Incans and the Aztecs about their calendars, they find out that this is really about a historical record. It's usually tied to a political record, and in this account, he's talking about Toltec kings and how his translator, his interpreter, is telling him that the calendar denotes every single king, and every king had a 52-year cycle. And if the king died within that 52-year cycle, a regent would take over for the rest of the king's reign, and then it would continue on. But there were two exceptions, and the exceptions were Lacombe, he reigned for 59 years, and then his queen reigned for 4 years after him. And he says, in the presence of this, you realize that this is not myth. They are recording their history, and they are meticulous about their history. So take that with what I'm about to tell you about. This is more of their history. The most picturesque account of the landing of gigantic strangers on the desert-like Pacific coast just south of the equator is given by Cieza de Leon. I will relate to you what I have been told without paying attention to the various versions of the story current among the vulgar, who always exaggerate everything. With this proclamation of modesty, he proceeds to tell the tale, which the natives, he says, have received from their ancestors from a very remote time. They arrived on the coast in boats made of reeds, as big as large ships, a party of men of such size that from the knee downwards their height was as great as the entire height of an ordinary man, though he might be of good stature. Their limbs were all in proportion to the deformed size of their bodies, and it was a monstrous thing to see their heads, their hair reaching to their shoulders. Their eyes were as large as dinner plates. They had no beards. They were dressed in the skins of animals, others only in the dress which nature gave them, and they had no women with them. When they arrived at this point, they made a sort of village, and even now the sites of their houses are pointed out. But as they had no water, in order to remedy the want, they made some very deep wells, works which are truly worthy of remembrance, for such is their magnitude that they certainly must have been excavated by very strong men. They dug these wells in the living rock until they met with water, and then they lined them with masonry, from top to bottom, in such sort that they will endure for many ages. The water in those wells is very good and wholesome, and always so cold that it is very pleasant to drink it. Having built their village and made their wells, or cisterns, where they could drink, these great men or giants consumed all the provisions that they had that they could lay their hands upon in the surrounding country, insomuch that one of these great men could eat as much as 50 natives could in this country. As all the food they could find was not sufficient to sustain them, they killed many fish with nets and other gear. They were detested by the natives because in using their women, they killed them, and the men also in another way. But the Indians were not sufficiently numerous to destroy this new people that had come to occupy their lands. All the natives declare that God, our Lord, brought upon them a punishment in proportion to the enormity of their offense. A fearful and terrible fire came down from heaven with great noise, out of the midst of which there issued a shining angel with a glittering sword, with which, at one blow, they were all killed, and the fire consumed them. There only remained a few bones and skulls which God allowed to remain without being consumed by fire as a memorial to the punishment. Cieza de Leon's story is one among a number of accounts of this race of giants that come from the sea and destroyed long ago by flame from heaven for their sins. To these legends, recent investigations have added a new interest. For digging excavations in the coast region of the North Cape Santa Elena, the members of George G. Hayes' expedition of 1906 and 1908 discovered the remains of a unique Aboriginal civilization in this region. Among its monumentous being stone-faced wells, corresponded to those mentioned in this early narration. It is the opinion of the excavation that these seats were thrones for deities, possibly also for human dignitaries, especially as clay figures representing men sitting upon such seats, images perhaps of household gods, while the figures of men, pumas, serpents, birds, monkeys, and other figures crouching cryptid-like are, no doubt, descriptions of supporting powers, divine auxiliaries, or gods themselves, monstrous forms, composites, animals, and grotesque frog-like images of female goddesses in bas reliefs, mute emblems of a forgotten pantheon, and add curious interest to the vanished race remembered only in distorted legend when the first coming Spaniards received the tale from the Aborigines. Juan de la Vasco, in the beginning of his history of Quito, he declares another incursion of men from the sea appeared on this coast to leave a more permanent trace, for the present city of Caracas not only marks the site of their first power, but bears the name Cara. The invaders are said to have come on balsas, the strange boats of this coast, formed of logs bound together, the longest at the center into the form of a hull, on which a platform was built, while the mast both cloth sails, and it is stated that the Spaniards encountered such craft as capable of carrying up to 50 men. The Cara were an adventurous people, and after dwelling for a time upon the coast, they advanced into the interior. According to Velasco, they eventually established their power in the neighborhood of Quito, where the Sri, as the Cara king was called, became a powerful overlord. From that time until Quito was subdued by the Incas, the Sri reigned over the northern empire, constantly extending their territories by war. But their power was finally broken when the Inca added the emerald of the Sris to the red fringe of Cusco to complete his imperial crown. The followers of the Sri, Velasco says, were the idolaters, having at the head of their pantheon the sun and the moon who were guiding them on their journey. He describes the temples built by those deities on two opposite hills at Quito, and that to the sun, having before the door 2 pillars, which served to measure the solar year, while 12 lesser columns indicated the coming of each month. Elsewhere in their empire, there were the usual local cults, worship of animal and elements, tales of serpentine form, water spirits, and adoration of fish and food. Besides the story of giants in the Cara, there is a third legend of an ancient descendant of seamen upon the equatorial coast of Balboa. It is the narration of the tale of the coming of the Nimlap and his people to Lambayeque, a few degrees south of Cape Santa Elena, and the story which he tells is given with the minuteness as to names and descriptions. At a very remote period, there arrived from the north a great fleet of balsas, a command by a brave and renowned chieftain, Nimlap. His wife was called Saturni, and a list of court officials is given. Pitazofi, the trumpeter; Ninacola, warden of the chief's litter and throne; Ninagentu, the cupbearer; Fongasidge, speaker or spreader of shell dust before the royal feet; Ochocalo, chief of the cuisine; Xam, master of the face paints; and Lapachuli, charged with the care of vestments and plumage. From this account of the entourage, one readily infers that the chieftain is more than a man, himself a divinity, and indeed they built a temple named Chot, wherein they placed an idol which they had brought, and which, carved of green stone in the image of the chief, was called Lampalek, meaning the figure of Nimlap. The ones closest to the point of origin tell us these are from countries that speak different languages, and I don't think very much care is taken into transferring it into the English language, so I don't want to put out anything that is false or not true. But it almost sounds like, yes, there were giants. Maybe they were looked at like they were gods, but Quetzalcoatl was a giant who is a god king who had a fleet with him and serpent-like features and feathers. This guy makes it a very good point that he wants to absolutely ensure he's giving the story that was given to him by the inhabitants of the land. It almost seems like what we are given today as Quetzalcoatl is a amalgamation of many legends of seafarers that hit the continent rolled into one. So anyway, that's my video. Yeah, I hope you guys have yourselves a great day. And if you like, please subscribe and leave a comment. All right, bye.